All right, Sterile Processing Universe, welcome back to another session of Operation Optimize in pursuit of workflow optimization in sterile processing. I am your host this afternoon, Lindsay Brown from Beyond Clean. I want to give a quick shout out to my co-host, Brett Norton, for covering the sessions early this morning and really getting the party started. I am so excited to see all of the icons that are coming through. You'll notice on the bottom of your screen on the far left hand of the left hand side of all of the icons across the bottom, there's a reactions button. That's where you can share your reactions to all of this information that you're getting today. If something is like makes you laugh, if something really speaks to your heart, if you're like, yes, I agree with that, there's the thumbs up option. I would love to see those keep coming through. It's really great to see your engagement during these sessions, and I know our speakers certainly appreciate it as well. I am so excited for this next session. Joining me for this session is Carol Malone, Systems Supervisor of Sterile Processing Education at University Hospitals. Carol believes that sterile processing techs play a major role in patient safety outcomes. So she strives to continuously educate on current industry standards and best practices. Joining her for this conversation is Amanda Wilcox. Amanda is a sterile processing education coordinator at University Hospitals. She's an educator who's passionate about being a student herself, a student of life, a student of sterile processing, and she certainly leads by example and is always willing to learn new things and grow in her role. Joining us again to facilitate this conversation with Carol and Amanda is Hank Balch. And without further ado, I know you're not tuned into this session to listen to me jabber away, so I'm going to turn it over to Carol, Amanda, and Hank. Thanks everyone for joining us today.
What's up, Sterile Processing Universe? I'm Hank Balch, really excited for this session of Operation Optimize, talking about case carts. If you're in sterile processing, everyone interfaces in some form or fashion with case carts. You may not be blessed to have closed case carts. You may have like a rack with some wheels, or if you're really small, you may just have those like little shopping basket looking things that you would get at like Target. But you got some kind of cart and you got some kind of process. So in today's session, we're going to dive into how to think about that process and how to think through and maybe challenge the status quo of the process that you have today to improve it. And this is going to have all kinds of implications that we'll talk about. There's going to be easy ideas that you can go back today and just make a change and potentially see the impact. And then there's going to be some longer term strategies that we'll discuss that also is going to have potentially dramatic impacts on the quality of service and on ultimately your patient safety in the operating room. So before we get too much further, I'm going to stop talking for a second and let our guest introduce themselves. Carol, let's start with you. Who are you, and why are you passionate about case carts?
Well, thank you for having me, Hank. My name is Carol Malone. I am the supervisor of sterile processing education for University Hospitals of Cleveland. So I do go to mostly 17 of our locations. So I have a lot of knowledge about case carts and seen a lot of things that work and some things that don't. So I think it's an important part of our job, actually, which is why I'm passionate about it.
You think you recognize Carol? You probably do. You may have seen a couple of her videos on the Beyond Clean YouTube channel through the Beyond Clean Advisor Group little video series that we're doing there. I've heard there's more of those videos to come, so stay tuned for those. Speaking of recognizing people, or maybe at least recognizing her voice, Amanda has been on the podcast with us. And actually, Amanda, has your episode even aired yet? I think it's coming out in a couple of weeks. Okay. Yep. So you're going to recognize her voice after the conference when you hear her podcast come out. So Amanda, who are you, and what about case carts really gets you excited?
Well, hi. Thanks for having me. I'm Amanda Wilcox. I am the education coordinator of the West Side for University Hospitals. Case carts. They're so exciting. Really, I like picking case carts. It's almost like a little, a game, so to say. really just, it's our way of showing the patient that we care. Being able to pick their cart, pick all the instruments that they may need, all the supplies they may need, and then working with the OR to help with any turnover. It's just exciting.
I love that that kind of connection to the patient, honestly, because it's the first time in our process that our instruments kind of get a name it's associated to them. Like before, they're on the schedule somewhere, but it's not really connected to any instruments or supplies. With this, in this case card process, all these random instruments get connected to a person for the first time. And yeah, that case card has a name on it and an age on it and a diagnosis on it. Really, really powerful to personalize what it is that we're doing in sterile processing. We're not just manufacturing all these little widgets, we're doing work that touches people. So great intro here. So before we get into all the complexities, because you may be sitting here if you're tuning into the session thinking, yeah, this is easy. I get a list, I go shopping, and then it's all in the cart and I'm done. Like, how complicated can it be? How are you going to talk for a whole hour on this? Well, let me tell you, we're going to talk for a whole hour, and we're not even going to get to all the intricacies and all the strategies and all the complexities around here. But I don't want to go too complex too quickly. So maybe, Carol, start us with a high level of just the process flow. So, like, what is the process from point A to point B in picking the average case card?
Process from point A to point B. So we get the pick sheet for the cases. Then we take them to, it could be any multiple number of areas that they go to, depending on where the case carts are housed, depending on where the soft goods are housed, depending on where the trays are housed. In my personal experience, we as NCS picked the case carts. So we actually physically had control of the case carts. We then got the pick sheets at the morning huddle, and we would start throwing packs on, and then we would be looking to see what we still needed to turn over from the previous day or the current day for the next day, based on the type of cases and things. And, depending again on your level or your travel of the cart, we would pick what we need to pick, send them upstairs. The OR would pick their piece. Then there needs to be a final check. And then a second check, still looking for things that need turned over. So that's kind of been my experience. I've not really had someone where I've run 3 shifts and had third shift involved and all that kind of thing. So
you referenced the schedule of this, and maybe this is as good a time as any to start talking about the schedule of picking, because you said that you're getting these sheets in the morning huddle. I'm curious, Amanda, what implications does it have then for this process that we've kind of laid out for getting those pick lists or those pick sheets that early in the morning?
So funny she should say that, because we never got them in the morning. We got them about 3 o'clock and had our third shift overnight pick them.
Okay.
So just getting scheduling involved, getting the OR involved, to when something's going to get turned over or you're going to have multiple cases, you need those smaller cases in between the ones that are going to need turned over, so that you have ample time to reprocess the instrumentation.
So you're talking about, I just want to, as we're getting rolling here, I want to continue to define some of these early terms. So number one, we need to define what the pick list is, what the pick sheet is, just for anyone who happens to be listening that doesn't know what we're talking about. So maybe let's start there, Amanda. How would you describe that?
So the pick sheet is essentially the list of instrumentation that you're going to need, soft goods you're going to need, any basins, peel packs, suture, anything that you might pick, the OR might pick, is all on a list based on what that case may be, whether it's an amputation or it's a lap chole. Each one individually has their own pick sheet. It's in most cases broke down also by physician. So we obviously have multiple physicians, multiple physician preferences. So that's what a pick sheet is.
And so, Carol, this is maybe let's spend a little time diving into these pick sheets, and then I want to go back to that schedule piece again. But as Amanda referenced, there's different doctors out there doing the same procedure, but they're doing the same procedure on different patients. So we've got a number of levels of complexity here. So an appendectomy is not necessarily the same depending on the type of patient, what's going on with the appendix, the type of approach the physician wants to use. So what is the implication of all that complexity on this pick sheet that we're talking about? Like, what happens to this pick sheet if it's a different physician that's doing the same procedure?
The pick sheet should be defined by physician. As she was saying, there's different physicians doing the same procedure. There's not a generic, like you mentioned, lap chole. There's not just a generic lap chole pick sheet. It's defined by Dr. Smith, Dr. Jones, because they may have certain things that they like to have. So those should be defined, and whoever's updating your pick sheet should have those items on there. What I don't like is when it's assumed that we in CS know that Dr. Smith wants XYZ on his case card, even though it's not on the pick list. So, it's a struggle. It's a struggle to get those pick lists updated correctly, and that comes into play when you're trying to train somebody. And it's like,
right.
Well, we just know that we throw this on there. Well, we need this stuff concrete updated so anybody who walks in can pick the case correctly.
I think they call that institutional knowledge, or tribal knowledge of it's just that same lady who's been picking case cards the last 20 years, and she knows. She doesn't even look at the pick sheet. All she needs to know is what doctor this is, what case it is, and then from memory it's kind of going. But we run into problems, to your point, which what happens if Dr. Jones says, I actually want to add something or subtract something, and it's updated on the pick list, but then you got Judy, for 20 years, she knows what Dr. Jones has wanted, and she's not adding that extra piece that is now on the pick list. Then you're running into those 7 a.m. calls of, where is my extra tray? Where's my extra instrument?
Yes.
I want to ask you a follow-up, though, Carol. In your perfect world, and I may throw this to Amanda, too, after you answer, just to see what she says, but your perfect world on updating these pick lists, who would be responsible to update, and what would that process or that kind of that verification process be? The doctor wants a change, or the service line leader wants a change, it gets requested, the change is made, etc. Like, what would you kind of paint that picture if you could have it your way?
If I could have it my way, goodness.
You laugh, but there are sterile processing folks out there. Actually,
I know
in Kentucky, one of my facilities, through years, we earned enough trust with the OR liaison that all of the service line leaders gave their pre-approval to go in and make changes, and then they would make changes to the count sheets, like, based on what the surgeon was requesting or what the issue was. And then they would just kind of send it over to the service line leader and say, hey, is this good? Because I made this change. So that's possible. But that was definitely the exception, not the rule to what we've seen out of this. Anyways, yeah, go ahead.
Well, typically the pick sheets we're talking about are updated by someone in the OR. It's, again, going to multiple facilities. It's different everywhere I go. It could be, like you said, a service line leader. It could be just, a certain specific nurse in the OR who's assigned that task, or the OR manager, assistant manager, whomever. So, yeah, in a perfect world, it would be nice to have that line of communication open and to have that update timely. I think that's a big issue too, is that they're not timely. And like you said, that tribal knowledge, it just is kind of the way things happen. And
it puts our team not only on the sterile processing side, it also puts the OR kind of in a crunch, because if it's a different nursing team than with Dr. Jones on the next day, and they're like, hey, Dr. Jones says, I requested this change yesterday, and I get the same issue today. Why was it not changed? Well, then the OR is like, let's call down the SPD. SPD, like, why did you mess this up? And, you know, the issue was that communication piece or that timeline piece that you mentioned. But, Amanda, there's also a process piece here in optimizing these updates and these changes and these requests, not only to the actual, you know, the printout, but also communicating that to SPD, because let's say the change was made in the OR the day that the doctor asked for it. No one told SPD, so we're not necessarily looking with eyes that these 22 or these 32 little lines, one of them in the middle now has changed to a 6-inch instead of an 8-inch. No one's notified us, and so we're just happily picking along, you know, got the muscle memory, and then boom, we make a mistake, and now we're held accountable for it. So talk first about what's your dream world for this update process, and then maybe if you've got any insight on what that, how to fix the fallouts and the changes there that I kind of alluded to.
So in a perfect world, from my experience, I would definitely get everybody that's going to be involved. So the service line leader, the OR manager, even the surgeon, and then SPD, if it's whether it's the manager or it's the service line leader within sterile processing. You want to get everybody's buy-in, so everybody knows, has knowledge of the change, and B, so that when, you know, they call down and say, hey, this is on there, but it's not supposed to be on there because it's not a circulator or a scrub that's usually in that room, you have the ability to keep everybody accountable and say, hey, this was a change that we made collectively. It is supposed to be on there.
One of the complexities in this conversation is we have this pick list that we've been referencing, and this is kind of the OR's insight into what's coming up on that case card. But then within the pick list, we have all these trays that have been assembled by sterile processing, and they've got their own pick list or their own recipe count sheet, and these can change. So maybe it's the same major tray, no change there, but the request was to add a different clamp or a different scissor into that major tray. So now you actually have a different tray than you had yesterday. The pick list has not changed, but hopefully this recipe has changed. That too has to somehow be communicated to the sterile processing staff in the moment, because you don't want that next cycle of trays to be coming through and then to be done incorrectly. How have you managed that, or seen success in the past of just keeping track of all of the changes that happen from day to day and week to week?
Yeah, I mean, I come from a smaller facility background, so it's easier in a smaller facility when there's 2, 3, 5 techs, and a smaller staff to deal with, so that the communication is pretty much instant or close to instant. But when you're working in a larger facility like our main campus, where there's 60 CS techs and they're across 3 shifts, and you have supervisors for every shift and service line leaders and so on. And I've seen the OR come down and literally take a tray, go through it, and just things are flying, things are going in, things are coming out, and they hand a sheet off to some poor tech stand. They're like, here, these are the changes we want. We just redid this whole tray. Well, but there's 10 other trays that are the same. Like, what are you doing? So it's tough. The communication, like Amanda was saying, is tough. In a perfect world, if we could have everyone together at this table and be having this conversation together, and then have the OR even go back and communicate to the scrubs and the nurses and that. Because oftentimes, too, we've had where they come running out, oh, this is supposed to be in this tray. It's not in this tray. We're going to, write you up and give you a quality, when in fact, it's not supposed to be in the tray. It's not on the count sheet. So I don't know. If I had the answer to this question, I would be a rich woman. I mean, communication obviously is number one important. Just trying to touch all the people that need to be touched. It's hard, no matter your whiteboards, your memos, your shift books, your emails. It's still it's going to be missed by somebody.
Well,
it's going to get to the OR.
Well,
you have to worry
about
it. Not just one doctor is using every single tray. So you've got a whole ortho team that's going to use your major bone.
Yes.
And Dr. Smith may like it with one clamp, Dr. Jones likes it with another clamp. So then it's that going back and forward to see where the compromise can be, and communicating with not only just the OR and sterile processing, but the end user, which is, in this point, the physician.
And the temptation or the trajectory of those trays is always to get larger, right? So like you get a request, and you're like, well, let's just add an extra clamp. That way everybody's happy and we're good. But we all know that's not a solution. It's definitely not an optimized solution to these requests or these changes, either from the pick list or the recipe list of the trays. So let's go back briefly here to the schedule question, and then I want to get into the more physical layout and process of this case card picking. Amanda, you mentioned before the need to be thoughtful about how we're scheduling cases as it pertains to our inventory levels. And I know, high-level strategy, one of the takeaways that I think would be very valuable for folks to walk away from this session knowing is the schedulers are not necessarily thinking that. They're not necessarily considering the limited number of bone trays we have, or the limited numbers of particular drills that we have. So in the impact then to your case card picking, obviously if throughout the day the schedule is requiring those turnovers, like you kind of alluded to, you need to be aware of that in SPD. But the OR needs to be aware of that, and then that information somehow needs to get back to the schedulers eventually, so they're not constantly putting you behind the 8 ball in a situation where you just literally do not have the inventory to support these schedules. So how have you navigated those conversations, and where have you seen success in getting that changed?
So a lot of our schedulers don't even have necessarily OR experience. They just see an open time slot and they're going to stick that surgery in there. So working with the OR, who in turn is usually the end user who finalizes the schedule, when we have that afternoon huddle, you have to be abrupt and honest and say, okay, this is going to need turned over. So you either need to switch these 2 cases or you're going to have to wait. I mean, they want this now, but without the proper instrumentation, we can't give it to them now.
In those conversations, in those huddles, Amanda, do you, when you identify the conflict, are you identifying that primarily just because the trays and the preference list just kind of by heart? Are you pulling that information from your tracking system, then bringing those conflicts to hand? What's that kind of process for you personally?
So it's really both. It's looking at what's potentially going to be the turnovers in the tracking system, as well as looking at the preference cards, seeing how many trays they're going to need. Especially if there's loaner trays, that's our main problem, is loaner trays don't come in on time. They need to be looked at extra carefully, and then we have to process them. So if we have, say, Monday was our big total day, we have 10 totals, and we got to turn over a whole set of 10 trays. You're going to shoot yourself in the foot, so to say, if you don't bring it up to management and say, hey, listen, we can't do these cases back to back because, I'm not a genie in a bottle.
Right. On the physical side of this, Carol, and so let's kind of walk through the process. Like, we've managed the cards themselves, so they should have everything on the list that should be there. Anything that shouldn't be there has been removed in the perfect world. Now we have a process that works. Now you're getting down to sterile processing, to your storage inventory, and you're ready to lay it out in the way that would provide the most optimized picking process. How would you start? How would you conceptualize the storage area and these preference lists kind of coming together to work together?
So conceptually, I like it divided by storage by service. So, we had a general area, an ortho area, by service, ENT, I, and so on, GYN. Then within those areas, in a perfect world, it would be some sort of alphabetical order. It doesn't really have to drill down that far, as long as you have the section with the service. It's typically what I've seen and what I've had, and that's worked okay. People typically can find what they're looking for. And the tracking system also, when you're scanning to the shelves, is very helpful. When you can't find something, and then you go and look and you see,
yeah. That is, if the scanning is done appropriately, it can be a tremendous tool. If it's not done appropriately, it can just be another pain in the neck.
Yeah.
So, yeah, great point. What about you, Amanda? Any insights just about that physical layout that you've seen to help the picking process?
So in a perfect world, you're going to want your pick sheet to kind of go row by row. So as you're going through that department, you can pick what you need in each row, and you're not going back and forward and back and forward. But you also want to make sure that your instrumentation that's going to get used all the time, so your major, minor bones, not necessarily your amputation tray is going to get used every day. So you want the stuff that's going to get used all the time to be in a reachable spot so that it's optimal for the person picking. They're not reaching over their heads for a really heavy tray. They can just grab it and go.
Right. Yeah, that comment about the pick list order, trying to match up to your layout of the trays, like, that's a very important point that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier on just, are these lists complete to begin with? Are they accurate to begin with? And then whoever's building the list, like, I remember this was probably years ago, 2014 maybe, we went live in one of my facilities with Cerner, and all the planning and everything, like all the work groups, all the hours, and then they kind of get to sterile processing. They're like, okay, guys, like, you ready to go live? And I'm like, no, we're not, because y'all have not invited us to any of these data conversations, any of the layout. And yeah, like, how are these things going to be coded? Are they matching our names of the inventory in our tracking system? Are they matching our shelves? To your point. So thankfully we caught them early enough in the process that we still had some time to work together. But yeah, that was a very important step in our workflow of optimizing those case cards, was saying, let's order the actual pick sheet in the order of our inventory, or vice versa, like whichever one you want to do. Like you can make your inventory then match the pick sheet if it's harder to change that. Typically, it's easier to change a pick sheet than it is to move all your trays around. But whatever it is, that's a great opportunity to gain some efficiencies, because like Carol mentioned, you don't want to be ping-ponging back and forth all over the place, trying to find these trays. You want to be able to stay in the same service line to pick all your trays at one time, and you want to be able to move down that pick list, like you mentioned, Amanda, in a way that you're not constantly ping-ponging around the pick list saying, oh, I'm down here, I need to go back up there. Now, we're kind of talking hypothetically in the perfect world, because we know there's all these instruments and all these procedures. It's impossible to just go down smoothly, because depending on the procedure, you may be picking stuff here and there, but you can at least be within arm's reach or within an aisle away to keep from all those wasted steps. So you mentioned something, Amanda, too, that I want to highlight, is kind of the ergonomic implications of your layout. And you said, like, you want the trays to be reachable, not the heavy ones on top, obviously, or even necessarily not the extremely heavy ones all the way down at the bottom. You're going to want them kind of in that middle row there, so you don't have to bend too much to get them off. Is there anything else that you've seen kind of process-wise or organization ergonomic-wise that has made it easier for folks to pick things in your processes?
So I would just say that optimizing the trays. So say, from my experience, we had a major bone, a small bone, a large bone, and a minor bone. So compiling those and kind of consolidating so that you could create more sets was definitely a huge success for us. Not only to stop the heavy turnover, but to kind of get the doctors to get together, get their buy-in, and say, right, hey, there's really nothing different between the small bone and the minor bone, except for a couple instruments. Can we just kind of smash them together and create just a minor bone? And the same thing with the large bone and the major bone. I mean, we went from having 4 major bones to having 8 because we were able to combine them together, which was really helpful, not only for us, but the OR, because then they had more to pick from.
Yeah, that piece about tray optimization could be its own conference session, probably like 2 or 3 conference sessions. But the fact that it's come up a couple of times already now is really important for folks to get. You can only optimize your case cards like to the level that your trays are optimized. Mm-hmm. Because if you've got 20 different trays and pill packs that you're picking because the rest of your inventory is not optimized, like you said, you're just picking all these extra things that perhaps like 3 of those little things are in one tray that you could have picked, or they could be combined, or I think you said smashed into one tray. And that over time, shift to shift and day to day and year to year, that's a ton of inventory that you're reducing out of the flow. That's a ton of containers, wraps, and indicators that you're reducing out of the flow. Tremendous impact on the whole output of the department, not to mention just these case cards. So yeah, it's a very important call out there. Mm-hmm. I want to go back to you, Carol, here for a second, because you also mentioned something that is not it's an example of one of the ways that we see out there in this space, but I kind of want to get your insights on it because it's not the only way to pick cards. Because you mentioned kind of a piecemeal process of in SPD, we pick our trays, and then the next stage of the case cart goes into OR for them to pick their trays. Do you like that process personally? And if so, or if not, what do you like about it and what don't you like about it? What are the challenges that you've kind of encountered with that? And maybe I might ask you a follow-up after you answer all those questions too.
Okay. So I've done a couple different things. At one location I managed, we put the packs on, the big packs, and the trays that we had down in the department. Then we would take the carts up to the OR, and we would grab trays off the shelves up there. And then the OR would pick soft goods like sutures, any of the soft goods that they would need, mesh, whatever was up there. And then another location, we were responsible to pick everything for the case cart, including soft goods. So, I mean, both processes worked okay. Again, these were smaller locations, 15 to 20 cases a day, smaller staff. So, if I had to say, I like sterile processing controlling the trays. And the reason I say controlling the trays is because we're the ones who are controlling the trays. We're seeing what's coming back, when it comes back, what's been used on it, which again goes to the tray optimization, where we can make suggestions to use alternate trays instead of turning over trays. For example, I used to get a podiatry tray with 150 instruments in it, and they would have to have it for a toe amputation, and then they'd send it back down, having used the knife handle and a Brown Adson. You're like, okay, so you couldn't have just peel packed those? You could grab peel packs? Now I have to turn over this whole tray. So again, I would see that stuff going on. I would have the conversations with the OR like, hey, you have 4 toe amps on today. I have 3 podiatry trays. Can you use, plastic tray? Can you use this tray or that tray? And have the podiatry tray on standby for all these cases. So if you really got into it deep and you needed to open that 150 instruments, you could. You could use the smaller tray. So,
well, yeah, you're getting back into the tray optimization
Yeah, sorry about that. We keep going back to it. But so I guess I would prefer to just control the trays and not the soft goods. But that way too, that helps your techs learn what's needed for the case carts. So they should know what trays go on what cases. So many times I go into a facility and the technicians are looking to the lead tech or the coordinator. Well, that's not my job. That's the coordinator's job to know what we need. Well, no, it's your job. You should know what blocks are for today, what's blocks for tomorrow, and what trays are needed for these cases. How do you not know? You see them when they come back down. You know what's on these carts. Like, how do you not know what's needed? So I think controlling the trays would be my final answer.
In my experience as a tech, that was always one of my weaknesses, probably, is knowing, if you gave me a procedure name, knowing not only what trays went with it, but what instruments out of those trays they would most likely be using. And that when we got the calls down, it's like, hey, we're in room 12, we need another one of these trays. I didn't quite know enough as a young technician to ask questions and say, what part of the surgery are you in? What instrument in particular are you looking for? Is there something I can do with the pill pack or with a smaller tray, to your point? Because all the way back to Amanda's point, if we're thinking turnovers and if we're thinking limited inventory, we have to be able to ask those questions. Otherwise, we're going to put ourselves in situations that these 2 follow cases, then they don't have what they need because we just picked off the whole podiatry set off of the shelf without really thinking. So what about you, Amanda? Right.
And then they start opening up trays too. They start popping other trays open. And
honestly,
really
we could talk on a quality session about the impact of really simple mistakes like missing indicators, and then that has on turnovers and on volumes and on frustrations all throughout the rest of the day, and sometimes multiple days if you're having a turnover like that, 10 loaner type case. If you forgot indicators in a couple of those, like that's gonna be a major impact to your workflow for the entire day potentially. Really, really big deal, even though it's not going to have an implication to the patient because it was caught. Potentially it would, I guess. It would delay their case. But anyways, I'm getting off topic here. You're doing this to me, Carol. just kidding.
Sorry,
so Amanda, I think like you're in some of these larger facilities, right? So what, in approaching this, this kind of control of the picking process or the collaborative picking process, where do you sit on that spectrum? Like, where would you, in your perfect world, like what would you want to happen?
In a perfect world, I am with Carol. I'd like to control the trays as well. But from my experience, we picked a lot of the soft goods, some of the trays, but a lot of like your trauma trays or very specific service trays were kept in the OR. So we never really knew if those kind of things needed turned over. It's really, this was key to having, that conversation and having open communication with the OR to say, hey, there's 2 more add-ons. They're going to go before the last 2 cases. So we're going to need XYZ turned over. Just having that open communication with them so that, we know what's going on, they know what's going on, and they know what the game plan is. Because you always have to have plan A, plan B, and plan C. And if you don't have any of those, that's a problem.
And it seems like even from the experiences that you two have shared, my own experiences, that there's kind of like an axis of the more trust and communication there is between SPD and the OR, the more comfortable you are with the shared tray inventory, because if you trust them, everyone's communicating, there's not going to be a lot of issues, and it doesn't really matter who's picking. If there's not a lot of trust or there's not a lot of communication on a regular basis, then there's more chances that you want to control the process of the trays, because at the very least, and can control what your own team does, even if you can't control what someone else's team does. So that's probably, like a lot of folks tuning in are somewhere in that spectrum. And I think it's important, as we voiced at the beginning, that there's not going to be one solution to your case cart workflow. And even an optimized workflow is going to depend on where are you in this communication trust axis. Because today, if you're here, then you may want to create a whole process where you control your trays. It's a very tight process, very clear. As that trust and communication grows, maybe you can let some more of those trays, especially those trauma trays you mentioned, live a little closer to the operating room. So we've got about 20 minutes, 19 minutes or so left here in the session. So I want to go through a handful of other topics here that I'm just kind of curious about, from my own experiences out here with case carts. In these big facilities, I've worked at a couple of level 1 trauma facilities, a couple of academic institutions. There's always a question on picking your Monday cases. So Amanda, I know that you've had some of the experience with that at the large hospital. So what's your preference on your Monday cases? Are you starting to pick those on Fridays? Is that a Saturday thing? Do you got like a night shift coming in on Sunday? What do you think there?
I hate Monday cases. So we had our 3rd shift person who worked Sunday to Thursday. So she would come in Sunday night and pick for Monday cases. But we were already kind of planning, turning stuff over. Our ortho day was Monday, so we had all of our loaner trays for our 10 totals. So we were doing that on Friday.
Okay.
But
because your loaner trays were coming in on Friday already for Monday.
Yeah.
Like, was that per policy?
So policy is they have to be in 24 hours in advance. But if we knew it was going to be a big total day, I was calling reps on Wednesday. Hey, one of your trays coming in.
Yeah.
Because not only are we turning trays over from Friday, we also have to prepare the loaner trays for Monday. So having that staffing as well as even the room was a big deal.
Right. So let's, I may have a follow-up for you on that, but I want to go to Carol next, kind of in the smaller context than out in your surgery centers, your smaller SPDs. What's your kind of Friday to Monday process? If you're closed on the weekends, or if you're not, it's just real light.
So smaller, we did take call on the weekend, so we were not physically there unless, a call case came in. So Fridays, you had to prepare for Monday. If you were not, then we would have to come in and, complete things before Monday. So, yeah, and typically what I, too, would do is every Monday morning, I would run a forecast schedule for the next 2 weeks. So I would know what was coming, or at least what was scheduled at that point, so I could prepare. I did try to make or create good working relationships with the loaner vendors, because we, too, had, like, orthos on Mondays. I don't know why.
Because they want to golf on Friday,
sure why
so they got to
do that
get
to
it out
us.
of the way at the beginning of the week. Okay.
There you go. So yeah, you try to have a good working relationship with your vendor, because you're right. It's going to mess with you, and stuff's going to come in. And then when they would ship it in, FedEx, right, that's even worse, when no one's there to receive it and you have to go and do that kind of thing. So I would try to be prepared as I could, running forecasts. And if need be, yes, we would work the weekend, or at least Sunday, to make sure we were ready for Monday.
I don't feel bad for you, because I used to have to work every other weekend in my facility, and I was always jealous of all those smaller facilities that could just take call. But I don't want to make you feel bad. Question about incomplete case cards, right? Because this is a challenge every department's going to have, from big to small, especially going back to the inventory scheduling conversation that we've talked about before. But that's an area of potentially tremendous waste of steps in kind of retouching of the case card. The whole like lean concept. You want to touch it as few times as possible. If you're missing inventory, and especially if you're missing like multiple trays, you could potentially be coming back to that case card 2, 3, 4 times after it was picked the first time. So what are your thoughts, or what's your process? What's your kind of goal for managing that incomplete card? And maybe let's start with Carol here first.
So there's a couple of different ways. Currently, we have a tracking system that creates a list based on, so the tracking system communicates with the pick sheets. So as the case cards are being picked and you're scanning items that you have put on that case card, the tracking system stops looking for that tray. And then once you're done, it creates a needs list. But again, scanning is only as good as the last scan. So some facilities still choose to not use that electronic list and to create their own needs list, either be it on a whiteboard, be it on a paper, with some format of highlighting on the actual sheet that's still on top of the case card, and then going around and making a list from that. Some of the locations that I go to have a person that's actually a couple have a person that is their job, is to pick case cards and to create that list. The problem with that list is, for some reason, it doesn't always get communicated to all the members of CS, and I'm still trying to figure that out. So the list
kind of data, the impact of that
data
data and the tracking system with that needs list, I think that's getting us closer than we've ever been. But to your point, unfortunately, the data within our tracking system sometimes is not quite all there. And so then you're operating off of a needs list that isn't the reality of what's needed or what's been placed on the case card. And so it's this kind of it's this vicious kind of circle. A question though, like you mentioned highlighting the pick list, and I've seen that done a lot before. Do y'all do anything else to your case cards that are missing? Like, do you identify them in any other way besides like little highlights?
Do we do anything? I'm trying to think. I go to several locations. I'm trying to think what they do. Right. The whiteboard is one thing. They'll write the item, they'll write the case, the time, the item. So it's on paper, it's on a whiteboard, it's highlighted, it's, you know, it's because people don't trust the tracking system either. That's another issue. That's another topic for another day about
well, that's a really important industry survey question. Honestly, I would love to ask as many people as possible, frontline technicians, on a scale of 1 to 100, how much do you trust your tracking system? Like, how much would you be willing to bet your life on what the data was telling you? And I think we would be potentially a little surprised at what the answers were. So, Amanda, I saw you shaking your head about there's other ways to identify these missing cards. What have you seen or done out there?
So we did not have closed case cards. We had open case cards. So we had to cover them with plastic. So the ones that were missing stuff, needed stuff to be turned over, whatever, would get the plastic just draped over the one side, would not get covered.
Okay.
And obviously the pick sheet would be on there, and then you'd put a sticky note on that said what was missing.
And so the process then, in general, kind of high level, the full slate of schedule gets picked for tomorrow. Did either of y'all just pick like first and second cases the day before, and then you'd pick your later cases after that? Or are you picking everything? Okay. Everything's picked. We got our needs list in whatever format it is. And then that information is hopefully communicated to the rest of the team. So, Carol, if that's working correctly, what does that process look like? Like, who should know? And then what should they do with that information once they know what's on the needs list?
So all the CS techs should know, regardless of where you're working that day. And they should also be looking for these things to come to decontam if they were used that day and get them turned over, you know, through decontam, and, you know, communicating with who's in front and pack to make sure they get that inspected, assembled, sterilized, and so on. So, your whole team really should know. CS team should know, from coordinator, supervisor, on down to all the techs.
And once they know,
do they always?
Let's say, so, decontam, for instance, I'm assuming if they know that this is a turnover, they need to expedite that ahead of the line. Then the same thing for your prep and pack and for your sterilization. In your sterilization stage, and if you don't want to answer this, maybe Amanda can answer this too, but at that sterilization stage, how are you tracking the priorities in those loads to make sure that when they're ready, they're coming off the load into the case card as soon as possible?
There's a few different ways I've seen facilities. Some of the facilities we go to, they actually put a paper on the handle of the cart that's in front. When you push your load in and you have your cart, they'll actually tape a paper with the information on it to the handle of that cart. So whoever pulls that out knows that there's trays in there there's something in that load that's needed. I've never done this, but I've seen people, post a note on the control panel of the sterilizer with the information, or again, the whiteboards. We also had a clipboard where we kept the pick sheet, so there would be a note on there on the, just the schedule. So kind of a
I think that's pretty common.
I guess everywhere. And communicating.
What about you, Amanda? Have you seen anything else outside of that for just kind of keeping track of where these trays are, making sure that at every stage everyone knows, this is on the needs list?
Nothing more than what Carol is saying, but I would say where I came from, I was a supervisor, so I was presenting that needs list to the OR to give them a heads up. Hey, these are the turnovers that we need. This is what we're missing. Even soft goods. If we picked it and we didn't have any, hey, we're out of this. Here's your substitute. Just so that everybody is aware, full circle.
I'll tell you, you may have heard us talk about this before in a previous conference or podcast, but there's a position out there that's called OR liaison or sterile processing liaison. And there's a lot of facilities that are lucky enough to have one of those. This conversation right here is a terrific kind of job assignment for that liaison position, because they're able to do exactly what you said, Amanda, which is take the needs information out of SPD to the OR and back again to SPD, especially if you're operating kind of the day before. So you've begun picking, the cases are still going on. You can then take that up to the OR and potentially even tag those trays. Like I've seen folks do like the little plastic luggage tags on there and say, hey, like, this is on the needs list for tomorrow. I've seen things like poker chips. I don't know if they're validated for the process or not, but I've seen those things out there just to visually identify that way, because what's hard, right? Like we're trying to remember IFUs, we're trying to remember everything else, all of these stages, then to also remember the 25 things that are on the needs list in the middle of everything that's going on, even if it's on the whiteboard. Like I know a lot of nights I'm working and it's on the whiteboard right in front of me, and it's just not clicking in my head. So anything else we could do to try to be creative to break that monotony of the normal reprocessing to make those things stand out, I think is a really helpful step there. All right, so we got 5 minutes left. And I know I've got a lot of other questions that I would like to throw out, but instead of me being selfish, let me give each of y'all a chance. Is there any other topic that you think, if you were listening to this presentation, you would want to make sure that someone mentioned or said before they wrapped it up? So let's go maybe first to Amanda. Like, what's the big takeaway, or what's something else that you want to add that just hasn't been discussed yet?
I don't really have anything. I would just...
Have we accomplished it all? Okay.
I would really drive home just the open communication with everybody between OR, SPD. I know that, trust is a big thing. And in a lot of places, that's where it lacks. So once we have that open communication and we're not, pointing the finger at sterile processing because it's always our fault, we can kind of take a deep breath, relax, and, have a subtle conversation that this is what's going to happen. Can you use this tray instead of this tray? Just opening that door.
Yeah, I agree. I think your comments about that communication proactively, especially to the schedulers, was a real big takeaway for me, for sure. What about you, Carol?
I agree. The communication piece is definitely important. You got to make these relationships. I was a supervisor, different locations as well. And you have to make the relationships with the OR, with the nurse manager, with the assistant nurse manager, with, whoever's up there that's kind of your counterpart, or the person that's going to be calling and screaming at you, when they need something. I mean, if we could put these fires out before they happen, and we really could with communication. I mean, I used to have a great nurse manager at the first hospital I worked at. She would write what loaners went with what cases on the total schedule as she gave me all the pick sheets. So I knew what to be looking for. That was phenomenal. It was something so simple, just handwritten on there with a pencil, yet it was a huge piece that helped me. And then I could communicate with her, hey, this stuff is here, it's not here, can you call, can I call? So yeah, it's so simple, but yet it's so hard at the same time, because it's notoriously been us against them, and if we could get rid of that, us against them mentality and just communicate with each other.
Yeah,
You know, our days
your comment
are
about
so much
relationships is deep, because that's not something that's easy to do. It's probably the hardest thing to do in sterile processing, even apart from the IFUs and from all the moving and lifting and everything we do. Building those relationships with our customers, I'll tell you, it's a lot harder to yell at someone that you know personally, and it is to just yell at someone that's just a voice on the other end or like a name on the other end. But if they know you, if they see you in the hall and they recognize you, then that kind of anger and frustration many times will go down a couple of notches. May not go completely away, but it's a lot harder to do that, especially if they begin to trust you and you're making improvements. And that's kind of my big takeaway I would add, to everything that we've discussed is anybody tuning in, if you can just get one nugget out of this session to take back and to improve your case cart process, that is a job well done. It'll be mission accomplished on this session, because that's all that we're asking for. Those small improvements every single day, that's what adds up to tremendous impacts and shifts in your workflow, in your staff satisfaction on both sides of the equation. One more takeaway that I did just think of, I wrote an article a couple of years ago about locking your case carts. We didn't get a chance to get into that conversation, but that's a debate. I'll just say I'm a fan of locking case carts with the plastic locks. They're breakable. I'm a fan of locking them because of what we were talking about with the turnovers and with the control of the process. But that, again, goes back to that little axis I talked about, depending on the trust and communication levels in your team. And, of course, if you got open case carts, you can't really lock that plastic. So no chance there. Well, ladies, tremendous job. Really looking forward to seeing the conversation that comes out of this session. But I want to thank you for sharing all your insight today.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, we're going to turn it back over to our host.